When Netflix released its special on the JonBenét Ramsey case, many believed that all the questions would finally be answered. But what if I told you they left something crucial out? A key piece that could change everything we think we know about this mystery. In this video, we will explore what Netflix chose not to show and how this could change the story forever. There are secrets so dark that even YouTube can't expose them. But if you're ready to go beyond the official versions and uncover the darkest truths about the greatest mystery of the century, I have something exclusive for you. The final dossier, the forbidden report of the McCann case. A unique piece of material that connects all the pieces ignored by the media and reveals the truths buried for years. Access it now through the first pinned comment. But beware, this content is exclusive and could be taken down at any time. Don't miss the chance to know the truth before it disappears forever. Click on the pinned comment and be one of the few to discover what really happened. When Netflix released its special on the JonBenét Ramsey case, many believed that all the questions would finally be answered. But what I'm going to tell you today is something Netflix didn't mention, and maybe for a good reason. A detail that could turn this story upside down and change everything we think we know. But before that, let me ask you, have you ever stopped to think about the contradictions surrounding the ransom note? It was found on the stairs of the house, handwritten, and at first glance, it seemed strange. 3 full pages, something that doesn't match the rush and chaos usually involved in a kidnap. That alone should raise some doubts, right? Now let's take a closer look at what was written. The amount requested, $118,000, was exactly the bonus that John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, had received that year. Coincidence? Hard to believe. This very specific amount suggests that the author had very personal information about the family. Would someone from outside know such a thing? Or are we dealing with someone close, maybe even inside the house? And it doesn't stop there. The note was written with paper and a pen found in the house. Can you imagine an intruder breaking in, looking for writing materials, and then calmly sitting down to write such a long note? Doesn't that seem too risky? This detail raises one of the biggest questions about the case. Was the note really written by someone from outside? Now let me tell you something you might not know. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, was the subject of much suspicion due to the handwriting on the note. Experts pointed out similarities between her writing and what was on the paper. But in the end, it was never enough to incriminate her, and that's where it gets weird. If Patsy didn't write it, then who did? While Netflix quickly glosses over this detail, a crucial point was left out. The note mentions a group called Foreign Faction, but no group by that name has been identified or claimed responsibility for the crime. Doesn't this sound like someone trying to create a distraction, a story to confuse anyone investigating? And here comes another contradiction. If the intention was to ask for ransom, why was JonBenét's body found inside the house? This completely breaks the logic of a kidnapping. Wouldn't it make more sense to take the child to another location? The presence of the note seems more like a desperate attempt to create an alibi than a real plan. Now here's something few people know. During Patsy's 911 call, the police believe they heard other voices in the background. This suggests that there were more people in the room than she initially admitted. Who was there? Never fully clarified. And what were they discussing? And Netflix skipped over this issue. Another point left out is the inconsistency in the state of the crime scene. JonBenet was found in the basement of the house, but the conditions didn't look like an opportunity crime. The place seemed staged, as if someone had tried to set something up. And this brings us back to the note. Could it be part of this theater? If all this still hasn't convinced you that the story has gaps, here's another detail. Many experts believe that the way the note was written, the tone, the choice of words, seems forced, almost as if someone were trying to sound like a kidnapper. Who would do something like that? So Mystery Hunter, the big question is, why did Netflix ignore these important details? And what does this say about the case as a whole? Stay with me because there's still so much to be revealed. Do you see how the ransom note seems more like a puzzle than a real clue? And what if I told you that crucial details about it were completely ignored? The connection between the amount requested, the place where it was written, and the emotional state of the person who wrote it raises more questions than answers. But why have these contradictions never received the attention they deserve? You know, I can't help but think, who writes a note like that with so much care and detail while a life is at stake? Something doesn't fit. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if we're facing a carefully crafted scenario. This isn't just about JonBenet. It's about what happens when obvious clues are dismissed or conveniently ignored. The JonBenet case reminds me of other real stories where a small detail was underestimated, only to, years later, change the entire investigation. The note, the state of the crime scene, and even the contradictions in the 911 call make us ask, what else was left out? And why does it seem like the truth was always right in front of us, but no one saw it? So let's get straight to the point. The ransom ransom note, which should be one of the most clarifying pieces of evidence in the JonBenét Ramsey case, is also one of the most controversial and confusing pieces of this story. The promise was simple: a ransom request for a supposedly kidnapped child. But from the moment JonBenét's body was found inside the family's house, the note stopped being just a clue and became one of the greatest enigmas of the crime. The first detail that doesn't fit is the choice of the amount requested. $118,000. Seems too specific, right? This isn't a random number. It's exactly the amount that John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, received as a Christmas bonus that year. Now think who, besides someone very close to the family, would know such a particular detail. A kidnapper who had never been inside that house? Hard to believe. And that raises the question, was the note written by someone who knew the Ramseys intimately? The way the note was written is the next point that catches attention. It's 3 pages long, detailed, with carefully crafted sentences, something very different from the standard expectation of a ransom note. Usually a kidnapper leaves something quick, direct, and to the point. Here we're talking about a text that seems to have been written without haste, and more, it was written with material found inside the house. The author, whoever they are, needed to search for paper and pen, sit down and take time to write. How does someone do that during an invasion without being caught or interrupted? And now we come to one of the strangest parts, which might explain why Netflix didn't give much attention to this detail. The handwriting on the note resembles that of Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother. This isn't just speculation. Experts pointed out significant coincidences between her writing and the note, but at the same time, they couldn't say with 100% certainty that she was the author. This left the case in limbo. Patsy vehemently denied any involvement, and this doubt was never resolved. Another point is the tone of the note. It mentions a foreign faction that was never identified. The choice of words, instead of scaring or pressuring, seems more like something out of a movie or an attempt to create an elaborate story. This is an important detail because it gives the impression that the writer wasn't really trying to get money or take the child. The very existence of the note seems like an attempt to cover something up, to create a scenario that would divert suspicion. Now, link this to the moment when Patsy Ramsey calls 911. The police notice something unusual in the recording. In the background of the call, even after Patsy thought she had hung up, voices can be heard. Experts say they sound like John and Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother. But why is this important? Patsy said no one else was with her during What were they saying? And why would Patsy lie about this? Another inconsistency comes from the house itself and the crime scene. JonBenét's body was found in the basement, a place that initially no one thought to investigate. The location seemed arranged, with ropes and tape carefully used. This doesn't look like the work of someone who broke into the house in a hurry, but rather like someone who had time. Time that doesn't match the narrative of a violent break-in or a crime committed by someone from outside. And there's what the note doesn't explain. If the intention was to ask for ransom, why was JonBenét's body in the house? Why wasn't there an attempt to take the child? This goes against all logic of a kidnapping, and that's why the note is so problematic. It doesn't answer the questions, it raises even more doubts. Netflix mentioned the note briefly, but didn't dive into the contradictions it represents. Was it to keep the narrative simple? Or because by addressing these details, the suspicions start turning inward? What's clear is that the note isn't just a clue left behind. It's the center of one of the greatest mysteries of the JonBenét Ramsey case. And this brings us to another question that still needs to be answered. Who really wrote that note? One of the strangest parts of the JonBenét Ramsey case isn't what was found, but what was left out. And that's where we start to enter darker territory. For example, the initial investigation overlooked something crucial: the records of what happened inside that house the night before. The movement, the lights on, the sounds. There are no external witnesses, but the behavior of those inside should have been analyzed more carefully. And now comes something many don't know. During the interrogation, when Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, was asked about what he heard or saw that night, he gave answers that seem rehearsed. He was just a child, but the gaps in what he said and what he didn't say continue to spark debates today. Did he really not hear anything, or was there something he couldn't tell? The silence inside that house hides more than words can ever explain. It's as if the details left out are just as important as those that were found. But there's one thing: the absence of answers often speaks louder than any evidence. And that leads us to a question that simply won't go away. What else is still hidden? And why does it seem like no one wants to find out? The ransom note isn't just strange, it's the central point of several theories that still divide experts today. As promised, let's take a closer look at these ideas and understand what might make sense, or what could be another attempt to cover the truth. One of the most discussed theories is that the note was written to stage a kidnapping attempt that never happened. This would explain why it was made with such care and why JonBenét's body was in the basement, inside the house. The author, whoever they were, wanted the authorities to believe that JonBenét was taken from her bed by someone from outside. But the evidence doesn't support that. There were no signs of forced entry and no trace that an intruder had entered or exited the house. So if no one entered, who left the note? Now let's think about the second theory, which points to the possibility that the note was hastily written by someone from the family. What leads many to believe this is the content. The 3 pages include sentences that seem overly elaborate for the context, like, "Don't try to be clever, John," and "You are being watched." Anyone who's analyzed real ransom notes knows that the tone is usually short, direct, focused on demanding payment and threatening. Here the note seems more concerned with sounding authentic, which ironically ends up having the opposite effect. Patsy Ramsey was one of the first suspects when it came to the note. Her handwriting was compared to the text, and experts found similarities, although they never reached a definitive match. This left a doubt in the air. Was Patsy covering something up? The fact that the note was written on paper from the house and with a pen that was also there reinforces this idea. It doesn't make sense for an intruder to have done this with so much time and calm. Another theory, which complicates things even further, is that the note was an awkward attempt to divert attention from a domestic accident. This hypothesis suggests that JonBenét might have died in accidental circumstances, something no one in the family wanted to admit. The note, then, would be a way to create a narrative that would divert suspicion. This scenario would also explain why the family's actions that morning seemed so disconnected, like calling the police immediately, even with the note asking them not to do so. But there's an even darker detail. The DNA material found collected from JonBenét's clothes, leading some experts to suggest that perhaps the theory of an intruder wasn't so absurd after all. But here's the problem. The DNA doesn't match anyone in the family's known circle, and to this day, there's no solid explanation for how it ended up there. The combination of these factors, the note, the lack of signs of invasion, and the DNA, divides experts to this day. Some believe the answer is inside the house, while others think there's still a piece of the puzzle outside, waiting to be found. So, Mystery Hunter, what do you think? Was the note an attempt to manipulate the crime scene, or part of a bigger plan that never came to fruition? I'll tell you something. As we look closer at the theories, it becomes harder to distinguish facts from staging. But believe me, there's still more behind this case, something that makes everything even more unsettling. The ransom note has always been at the heart of the theories, but there's something about it that, until now, has been little discussed, something that could change the way we see this case. Remember when we talked about Patsy Ramsey's handwriting? What if I told you that new details about the comparisons made at the time add another layer of complexity to the story? The experts who analyzed the note not only compared Patsy's handwriting, but also how she wrote in different situations: Christmas letters, personal notes, and even quick messages. Although the similarities were never enough to incriminate her, there's one piece of information that caught attention. Some letters and strokes in the note show inconsistent characteristics, as if the author were trying to disguise their handwriting. This attempt to hide the author's identity raises an inevitable doubt. Was Patsy trying to confuse the investigators? Now let's go beyond the note. During the initial investigation, one of the detectives pointed out something that, at the time, went unnoticed. Patsy Ramsey was impeccably dressed when the police arrived, something unusual for someone who, supposedly, had gone through a chaotic night. Some interpreted this as a sign of guilt, while others argued it was just an attempt to keep composure. But here's the detail that few noticed. Her clothes didn't match the fibers found in the basement near JonBenét's body. Whether Patsy was or wasn't in the basement that night is something that remains unanswered. And now comes a revelation that seems to have stayed out of the spotlight. The tape found in JonBenét's mouth had fabric fibers that didn't belong to any of the household members. Does this reinforce the theory of the intruder, or are we dealing with another attempt to create a confusing scenario? The turning point, however, comes with a completely unexpected element. During a recent review of the case, experts identified something on the edges of the note that had never been disclosed: partial fingerprints that don't match Patsy, John, or anyone close to the family. They also don't match known records in the database from that time. If these fingerprints belong to an intruder, then what explains the lack of signs of a break-in? But here's the most unsettling detail. The DNA found on JonBenét's clothes also doesn't match the family's, but the circumstances in which it was collected raise more questions than answers. Some say the evidence could have been contaminated since the crime scene was poorly preserved, but what if this DNA is the only concrete proof that someone from outside was really there? The case takes a new turn when we connect these details to patterns of similar crimes. In 1994, in the same area, a young woman was found in similar circumstances. Inside the house, house with signs of assault, but no clear evidence of invasion. In that case, the perpetrator was never identified, but the modus operandi has disturbing similarities to what happened with JonBenét. And now we return to the central question. Why was the note written? Was it really an attempt to create a distraction, or was it the only real clue left by the author of the crime? These new elements open up a possibility that few are willing to consider. What if we've been looking at the note the wrong way? Instead of seeing it as an attempt to cover something up, maybe it's the only window we have to understand what happened that night. And that leaves us with a question that won't go away. Is the story we've always believed to know really what happened? With every detail we review in the JonBenét Ramsey case, it becomes clear that the truth isn't as simple as we'd like. The ransom note, which should be a definitive clue, has become the symbol of all the unanswered questions. The contradictions, the gaps in the theories continue to leave more doubts than certainties. What is real in this case? And more importantly, about JonBenét, it's about how we handle the truth, how we ignore details that could change everything, and most of all, about the devastating impact that such a crime has, not just on the family, but on all those seeking answers. If there's a lesson here, it's that we can never stop questioning. And before you leave, I want to know, what do you think of all this? Which theory makes the most sense to you? If you watched until here, comment, "I'm a hunter of truth, so I know you stayed with me until the end." And don't forget, is there something you want to see here? Any case that intrigues you or deserves attention? Leave your suggestion in the comments. Oh, and if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, because what's coming will blow your mind. In the next video, we'll talk about another equally intriguing case, something that will satisfy your curiosity for stories full of mystery and twists. Just click on the next video on the final screen. I'll see you there.